I'm gonna get started. Is that okay? Shoshana and Rachel, are you both ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just gonna welcome everyone. I think we have a couple of new parents online with us. So thank you so much for participating in our third installment of, sorry, there's a TV on in the background, which is very loud. Let me just get this off. So thank you for participating in our third installment of Heschel Sunday Suppers. It's an opportunity to cook together, to learn together, learn new tricks, discover dishes that are easily substitutable as we find ourselves doing a lot more cooking than we ever have done before. So it's my pleasure to introduce our Sunday Suppers teachers, Shoshana Quint and Rachel Simons. They're two current Heschel parents and culinary professionals. Shoshana is a professional chef, having worked in commercial kitchens and private homes. Rachel is a remarkable home chef in her own right, and she has also started an artisanal food company about 4 years ago. During the class, since we're a small group, if you have questions, you can just unmute yourself. I think our host, David from Heschel's IT department, has given everyone the power to unmute themselves, or you can use the chat function and either Rachel or Shoshana will read it and address it. But we're a small group, so I think the unmuting and asking is completely fine. So without further ado, I present Shoshana and Rachel.
Hi, everybody. It is really nice to be back, week 3. I see a couple of new faces, so I thought I will just give you a 2-second intro. So Shosh and I got together a few weeks ago, just before we initiated this idea and suggested it to the PA. And the real goal here was to connect with each of you and to help you with ideas and inspiration in the kitchen. It's really fun to see you all, and we really love hearing from you afterwards. So please keep asking questions either during the class, or a few of you have emailed Shosh and I outside of the class, which is really fine. We love getting those questions, and we're here to help. So in terms of today's class, I just wanted to clarify a few things. Today's class actually is a little bit more around some prepping items, and it's a little bit more around ingredients and meals outside of today. The granola, which we'll come to first in a second, is something that you could have as a snack, but obviously most people have granola in the morning for breakfast. So we hope that today will give you some meals that will take you through the week and beyond. The second thing is, I just want to clarify, if it wasn't very clear in our original recipe, we're going to make some pastry dough together today. But for those of you who haven't made pastry dough before, it's something that generally needs resting and refrigeration before you use it. So what we're going to do today is make the dough for the galette, and then we're going to freeze it or put it in the fridge, and then we will do the inside and the final baking project next Sunday. So that I hope no one's going to be disappointed, but we won't be eating the apple galette tonight. We're just going to make the dough today. So before I jump into the granola, is there anything else you wanted to jump in with, Shosh, quickly?
For me, no, we're good to go. I do, if people anticipate doing the galette, just feel free to email me after the class and I can guide you through the process of either the sweet or the savory, or get you to like very easy websites that will walk you through it. So it's not a problem. People have been emailing me, and it's really it's a pleasure.
Okay, great. So let's start with the granola. If everybody wants to quickly put their oven on, because it's always best to put the granola into a hot oven. So if you want to quickly turn around, or if you haven't already, I would suggest preheating your oven to around 375 Fahrenheit. And the next step, whilst you're getting your oven hot, the next prep step is to take some flat pans. So I usually make a big batch. So I usually take around 2 or even 3 of these, depending on how much you make. And then I just lay parchment paper over the top. So in terms of prep, if you want to get 1 or 2, even 3 of those ready, that's always good, because once you've made the granola, your hands are going to be dirty. So it's always best to start with those steps. And once you've got your pans, we'll get going with the granola. So one or 2 things that I wanted to mention about making this. We've shared a recipe and we'll follow the recipe today, but in the spirit of substituting items that you may or may not have in your pantry at the moment, I wanted to say that actually this is a recipe that I substitute with, and I make this on a slightly different variation every single time. For me, this is one of my favorite ways to empty my pantry. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to hold some of them up, but I end up with like bags and bags of seeds and nuts and chia seeds and different types of pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds and sesame seeds and oats. And my pantry ends up being a jumble mess of half finished bags of these sorts of items, and they do last a long time. But what I love about this recipe is that I get to just go to that pantry, empty all of it into the bowl, make a bowl of granola, make a batch of granola, and then you have something to eat for the rest of the week. And you can actually eat this as a snack or as a breakfast dish. So the base, the very starting, the one thing that I generally don't ever substitute are the oats. You can make this without oats if you're looking to have a gluten-free version of it. I have seen lots of people make granola without oats altogether, but I use oats. And you can...
I thought oats were gluten-free. This is Sarah speaking. What?
No, you have to get the ones that say gluten-free.
Oh, okay.
I don't think they're necessarily. There are gluten-free oats, very accessible, especially the box milk.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that, Sarah, because it is really easy to access gluten-free oats, but I don't think the ones that I generally buy aren't. So let's just start with the oats. And again, I'm actually not going to measure because you can measure away, but honestly, from my point of view, I just tip things in because you really can't go too wrong with this recipe, no matter how much you put in of each ingredient. So I'm going to throw in my oats. So I started as well, by the way, with a big bowl, and it's good to have something as big as you have, because you're going to get your hands dirty or you're going to want to mix it well. So I started with my oats. I am next going to go to my nuts. Now, I know the recipe called for pecans, but I am going to use, I'm just looking for them. I'm actually going to use walnuts. I didn't have pecans, and walnuts are my faves, so I'm just going to grab a handful of my nuts, and I'm actually, you could chop them, you could throw them in whole. The texture just depends on how crunchy you want the granola to be. I actually like lots of texture, so I'm actually using whole walnuts, and I'm just crushing them a little bit in my hands. Okay. Next, I'm going to add my pumpkin seeds or pepita seeds. Now, I actually bought salted pumpkin seeds and roasted. You can use unroasted or roasted. The reason that I picked the salted is that it's always nice to have a little bit of salty sweet in granola, but just be a bit careful. If you're going to use salted nuts and salted seeds, then it can get a bit too salty, so just watch out for that. So I'm just going to throw in a handful of my pepita seeds. I'm now going to throw in a handful of my sunflower seeds. And again, there's no special rules on this, but what we're looking for is a real mix of nutrition and texture here. I don't think the recipe that we sent actually called for chia seeds, did it? I'm just having a quick reminder.
It was listed as a substitute.
Yeah, all right. So chia seeds are something I always add. There's so much nutrition in chia. So from my point of view, it's like this innocuous, tiny, tiny little seed that you can just throw in and you barely even know it's there. The one thing to look out for when using chia seeds is that they, when they get wet, they expand and they often get stuck in your teeth. I don't know about you guys, I always end up with chia seeds stuck in my teeth. But that's about honestly the only downside to using chia. It's so nutritious. So we've added the chia. I'm actually going to add in also some sesame because that's super nutritious. And I think I've got my base, oh, the coconut. Let me grab my coconut. With coconut, I tend to use a mix, again, no rules, but I tend to use a little bit of the really finely, like desiccated, I call that desiccated coconut, so really fine flakes. But then I like to add, if you have it, and again, no big deal if you don't, but if you have it, it's really fun to add these really big, I think you can see that here, but they're really big flakes and they toast really nicely. So you end up with a beautiful color and texture, and the coconut adds tons of flavor as well. Okay, so they're the base. Now, whilst it's dry, before you add any of the wet ingredients, I'm just going to use my hands to get it all combined. Again, no rules. You can use a spoon if you don't want to get your hands dirty. So that's the dry ingredients. Now comes the wet ingredients, and this is really the binding or the glue that's going to hold everything together. And what you want with this binding for the granola is really a mix of something that's like an emulsifier. So I'm going to use olive oil. If you don't want to use olive oil or you want to add another sort of fat to it, the two that I generally often add would be coconut oil or coconut butter is really nice to granola for flavor. And the other thing that we talked about tahini last week, but I always add a couple of tablespoons. If you don't have a sesame allergy, a couple of tablespoons of tahini is really nice in granola as well. Adds a lot of flavor and it adds that oiliness that's going to help the granola get crispy in the oven. So they're the fat sources for your granola. The other glue part to the granola is I'm going to use maple syrup, but you could use honey, you could use agave, you could use date syrup or Ceylon. Actually, date syrup is really, really delicious. But today I'm just going to use maple syrup. So I'm going to add maple syrup again. If you like it sweet, add a bit extra. If you don't want it super sweet, you can hold back a little bit. But the sweetness is also going to caramelize. So that will help with a little bit of crispiness as well. So I've added my maple. I'm now just going to grab some olive oil. And again, I like my granola to be pretty crispy and crunchy, but if you're looking to hold back a little bit on the oil, no big deal. I probably wouldn't leave it out altogether. I think it always needs just a little bit of oil just to make it crunchy, but you can restrain yourself if you want on that. So right now, my texture is wet, but I think you can see all of that. My hands are pretty dirty, which is why I suggested getting those sheet pans prepared early. So I'm about to lay it out. Before I lay this out, anyone have any questions? Or this was a pretty easy recipe, right?
I'll just tell people what I use so people get. I put hemp seeds because I didn't have chia seeds, so hemp seed is a good thing. I don't know if I could. Almonds because I have an allergy in my family. Sunflower, pumpkin, and I happen to have had gluten-free oats actually, so I put gluten-free oats. Yeah. Could someone put, like, if they wanted to, like, if they liked it, like a little bit of cinnamon, if their kids really like cinnamon, or flavor it up with that, if they wanted certain spices, do you think if their kids like cinnamon, it would be a good way to add it? Well,
I love cinnamon. I love adding cinnamon to granola. The other two things that are really fun to add if you've got it, if you've got any cocoa powder and you want to add a shake of cocoa powder, then it ends up being chocolate granola, which is also a bit more fun and the kids might get a bit more excited about it. And what else? Oh, the other thing about granola is you can add dried fruit. The one thing I'd say about adding currants or sultanas or apricots, any dried fruit that you want to add, just be a bit careful. I would probably add it at the end or add it just before you're finished, because it tends, I often put currants in and then they burn. So they get a bit too burnt and crispy, and then that's not great. Okay,
And
All right.
did, when you said the tahini, did you say that was instead of maple syrup, some of each instead of olive oil? I just missed what it was a substitute for.
So tahini's a fat.
Yep.
It's the sesame oil when you crush the sesame seeds. So it's a substitute for olive oil. But when I make it, I actually use a little bit of olive oil, a little bit of tahini, and also a little bit of coconut butter or coconut oil. They're all fat sources, and they're all going to help the granola get crispy and crunchy like an emulsifier. The substitutes for maple syrup would be honey, date syrup, Ceylon. That's more of a sweet. And it will help caramelize.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, I'm just going to grab, so I've got my pan, my sheet pan. The only real trick here, the thing that you need to know about this step is don't overcrowd the pan, because then it won't get crispy. So that's why I end up often doing this with almost 3 pans. I'm going to show you, I'll spread mine out and then I'll move my camera so you can see what I'm doing. Sorry, my kitchen wasn't well set up for a TV show today, but I'm going to show you. I've got, my hands are covered in granola. Give me 2 secs. All right, so I think you guys can see that. What I've got here, this isn't the best angle, but I'm trying. But I've got lots of space, and you can see a little bit of the parchment paper. You want to be able to see a little bit of the paper and spread it out as much as you can. And that's about it. And if you didn't use salted nuts or salted seeds, I think a little sprinkling of sea salt never goes astray. So that's it. I'm going to put this into my oven. Give me 1 sec. So I've popped it in the oven. Now, the other word of caution here is that I always burn granola. It's just my kryptonite. I don't know, burn nuts and I burn granola. So just set a timer. Don't forget about it. It needs about 15 minutes at the most. And I really strongly suggest, depending on your oven, just to keep checking it as you go, make sure it's not burning. And one other thing, even when you think it's not burning, sometimes it actually is just on that verge and it will keep cooking sometimes. So take it, just be wise and be a bit more careful than you think you need to be.
Rachel, if you're using 2 or 3 pans, are you putting it on convection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually was about to get my second pan and spread that one out. So I've got another one about that size. And the other thing is, we'll come back to once this is cooked, but I'll say it now in case I forget later and we get distracted. Once your granola is baked and out of the oven, you want to let it cool. But once it's cool, you want to put it in a sealed container straight away, because that will keep it crunchy and fresh. And this should be good for a good, in our family, honestly, we would eat this for about 2-3 weeks. If you want to be a bit more cautious, try and eat it. It'll be freshest basically within the first week. But it's a good snack, or it's a good breakfast, good with yogurt, berries. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, granola. Anything else you want to add?
If you were adding the currants, when would you add them in the 12 minutes of cooking?
You know, I typically just shake them on, because the other thing is you sometimes want to give the granola a bit of a shake halfway through. So when I'm giving it a bit of a shake, I would just scatter the currants about 5 minutes before you're taking it out of the oven. I don't know, Shosh, do you have a view about fruit? I don't know the precise answer to that, but I do know that I always end up with burnt cremated currants in my granola. So I've started to add them later in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think my kids would want to know when the chocolate chip is going. That's a better question. But I think with currants or raisins or any type of dried fruit, I don't even know if you necessarily have to cook the granola. I think the residual heat from the granola, when you're cooling it down, you can put in your dried fruits. They'll get a little plump from the heat, and then they'll sort of stick. And I don't think you have to go and put them in the oven.
Yeah, actually, Shosha, it's a great point. I sometimes don't add the fruit in the bake process at all. You can always just add that afterwards.
Yeah,
And yes, you can add chocolate chips. I did, honestly, the combination of the cocoa powder and cinnamon is a really good one because it ends up being really dark and chocolatey and really yummy. So I'm going to hold up this sheet pan. I think you guys can see that I've tried to leave lots of space, not, you know, spread it out as much as you can. And I'm about to put this second one in the oven. And I'm going to set a timer whilst Shosh takes us through the next dish, but I will remind you guys, but don't forget. So I'm going to set a timer for about 10 minutes and we'll come back, all right? So that's it. It's super easy. But I mean, again, the one thing I'd say is that I was shocked about how much people would spend on store-bought granola when it is so easy to make in a big batch. Have in your pantry, use up all those ingredients that are sitting there anyway, and you know, save the world and the packaging and make it yourself. It's really good.
If you make a big bunch, also you could. I mean, I like sometimes I get from my friend who gives me my favorite granola. Put it in the freezer so that the nuts don't get rancid. A lot of the nuts go rancid, so you don't want them sitting out. I bag it, I put it in the freezer, and I pull it if you've doubled or tripled your batch.
Yeah, or put it in some mason jars and give it to a neighbor or a friend. It's a really nice gift. I love it when friends, so I think I shared my friend Jill's recipe, and every time I see her, she drops around with a little mason jar of granola that she's just made. And it's a really fun thing to take to somebody. I think it's really a nice, thoughtful gift. So that's it on granola. Shosh, you want to take it away on our next dish?
No other questions? Yeah, so the second dish, it's like a bit of a departure from last week where we really made you guys work. And we used up a lot of time. And now we're like, how are we going to fill the time? But I think we often forget that food could be really simple and not complicated, and it doesn't have to involve 100 steps for it to be good. And I think during these times, you know, the pasta salad is like sort of forgotten, and I think it's unfortunate. I know people are on diets, or they don't like this, or they don't like that, but I think it's something just to put back in your repertoire because it's so versatile. It's healthy. You could get whole wheat pasta. You could get chickpea pasta. You could do wheat berries. But the pasta is a pasta dish is a really good recipe to have in your repertoire right now because it's easy and fast. So this is totally one idea. You could do many variations of this. We're doing the Mediterranean pasta that has feta, tomatoes, cucumbers, and some herbs, whichever herbs you have. If you don't like feta, you could put in those mini mozzarella balls. If you don't like cherry tomatoes, you could put in dried tomatoes. I actually didn't have tomatoes originally, but I got some. I'm putting in a red pepper because I find that's a great addition. You could put in almost anything. I didn't have arugula, so I chopped up some kale. I'm putting in kale. So really anything goes. The arugula is really nice to have, but if you don't have it, anything green and leafy, you could chop up and put it in. And I'm doing the chickpeas. I'm actually gonna do olives because I love olives, and no one else is gonna eat this salad with cheese in my house anyways, and feta. So the one addition that I thought would be really nice, and I don't take credit for it, I had it at a restaurant. Some chopped up dates is a really nice addition. I had a date salad that had everything but the pasta in it, like the feta, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, the olives. And I think it had a bit of either tabbouleh or couscous or farro. And they had just some like very cut up, chopped medjool dates. And it really was really nice. So instead of the nuts, because I don't have pine nuts, I'm gonna put in medjool dates. So I'm using fusilli pasta, not rigatoni Rachel. I am, you could do spaghetti, you could really do any pasta, but you know, this is a good way to just use up any old pasta. You could do, if you have like, I do sometimes half boxes of pasta that are just sitting there, and you could use your bow tie pasta, half bow tie, half fusilli, or your elbows, just throw in all your different pasta. And you could make it a little less pasta heavy if you didn't want all the pasta in it, but I use the exact, I'm doing 3 cups of that. I diced up everything to have similar sizes. So my peppers, my cucumber, my olives, everything has a similar size. So it's, nothing's like falling out of your mouth, and it's easy to get onto a fork. I have a few cherry tomatoes, and I have, this is like what the question I get asked often is like, when do you use these really good oils and these really fancy olive oils? This is where I would, I use it when it's really very much a component of the Mediterranean salad is a really fine olive oil. Don't save your oils. Don't save your truffle oil if you ever bought one. Don't save your hazelnut oil because it's super expensive. They're going to go bad. They're going to go rancid. You could prolong their death by putting them in the fridge, but ultimately you got to use your oils. You got to use them. You got to use them fast. You got to use them now.
Yeah, actually, Josh, that's a good question. I never know the answer to this. What do you think is the shelf life roughly of a good bottle of olive oil?
So a lot of, you know, if you're using as much olive oil as like, this is I think a fairly decent one. Most of them will have an expiration date. They're usually not that big anyways. If they're kept in a dark bottle, which they usually come in, or those tins, and they're in like a pantry without light, they'll last a while. But
like what's a while? Like a year?
Yeah, but I would even venture to say, if everybody here looks like they're cooking as much as they're doing, those tins are not going to last that long. So a tin will last a year. I think you have a shelf life of a year, 6 months to a year on olive oil. Olive oil doesn't go rancid. I mean, the really fine olive oils will tell you that the shelf life is 6 months, but nothing imported to America will have a 6-month shelf life. It's already like, it's been overseas. It's not that virgin, so to speak. It's bottled, it's coming over, it's going to last a while. It's really your fancy your nut oils that go bad really quickly. So I like to use the nice, like, I think this would be if I was doing chopped hazelnuts, this would be a nice time to put in like hazelnut oil. Those are really good oils. And fun to use, but they do go bad. So try not to, don't save the oil. Throw the truffle oil in on this if you have that bottle of oil.
And Shosh, is this correct? But someone once told me that if you're really heating your oil above even a very small temperature, then there's no point using a fancy oil because the heating process takes out the aroma and the flavor anyway. So why bother?
Right. So I mean, so oils generally, like the discussion on oils come up a lot. So generally oil is good for you and fine for you until it gets heated above a certain point or used to a certain point and becomes carcinogenic. So no, I wouldn't waste a really fine oil into frying because the flavor, it's going to get lost. You're going to burn it off. That said, I do a lot of my cooking in olive oil, and I don't buy the cheapest one, but I certainly don't buy the most expensive. Anything that is really thick and has a very like grassy smell and very heavy usually doesn't appeal to a lot of people. And that's another reason why I wouldn't go ahead and use something that has very specific notes to it, because it might not have mass appeal. And if you're certainly going to like deep fry something, it will get lost. But if you're slightly poaching something, like a little piece of white fish with lemon and white wine and oil, you could cook with it that way. But anything beyond where you're crisping it up and it's getting fried, I would not use a good olive oil. So. that's, yeah. So, so what else? So did everyone want to wait? Did everyone have their pasta ready or no? Any other questions about alternatives and what people could put in?
Sure. So this is Tally. With respect to the dressing, you know what my question's going to be. What can you substitute for the mustard?
Yeah, oh, okay. So, yeah, I figured, so I think you don't need to substitute. So first of all, the mustard is not necessary in this salad at all, especially if you have olives or capers would be a nice pungent thing to put in instead of the mustard. If you wanted a bit of sweetness, you could put a little bit of honey, lemon juice, honey, and capers and olives would be a nice vinaigrette. But the vinegar is really the mustard is just really to thicken it, but you could just omit it completely. I don't think you have to replace anything.
Thank you.
Aubrey, you have a question?
Can we use basil instead of mint?
Yes, good question. You absolutely could use basil instead of mint. You don't have to put any herbs you don't like, but I'm actually using parsley because I love parsley. It's very fresh tasting always. And I'm using a very little bit of basil that I had in a pot, and I'm mixing all three up. And in fact, if you chop up the herbs and the garlic like we did for like a chimichurri, that's also really a nice, you don't even need to go beyond that and just dump that in. I think the mustard's just there to sort of bind it a bit, but I think that if you have a lot of herbs, a lot of lemon juice, and good olive oil, like a really nice thick olive oil, then you're good to go.
Actually, Shosh, that's a nice point. We could use anyone who was with us on the first class when we made that chimichurri. If you have any of it left or you want to make it again, that would be a perfect salsa or a perfect sort of addition to this pasta salad. It would go well. I personally think there's no herb that can go wrong in this dish. As long as it's green and kind of leafy and fresh, then it's going to be great.
Yeah, and also the garlic, the only thing is like with the garlic, you want to mince that garlic up really nice so no one bites into a big chunk of garlic. And the good way to do that is either use like these mini choppers. If you have really good knife skills, you could go ahead and do it. What I like to do is I'm going to try to show everybody. I'm going to chop down my garlic. I could put a little oil and salt, and it helps really make a paste. And that's also a nice way to make sure that the garlic is very fine. Otherwise, people will be chopping in, like biting into raw garlic. So just keep going back and forth on it.
Shosh, you don't cheat with a garlic crusher?
I don't cheat. I cheat on other things, not when it comes to food, but no.
I touching garlic. My hands always smell for about 5 days once I touch garlic. That's why I use the garlic crusher.
You know, I often use the mini chopper. I put in tons of garlic, oil in the mini chopper, and then I put it in a container and I use it for 2 or 3 days. I do that. And what I like to do is like, you could just put everything in like a little jar, put it in, and then shake it up instead of like using a fork or like a covered container, a plastic container, and then you have your vinaigrette. And usually when I get a good vinaigrette that I like, I would triple it and you would have it for all week. If you could just make your favorite vinaigrette, double it, triple it, you have it all, it's gonna last well over a week. Then you know you have it in the fridge and you don't have to, it's just one less step.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for a second and remind everybody.
My granola, if anyone wants to check theirs.
Yeah, I forgot about my granola. I'm taking mine out of the oven because I just opened my oven and realized it was already almost burnt. So give me, anyone else who's cooking theirs, baking theirs now, I would recommend giving it a good check. So hold on.
So I'm just gonna, I'll hold off. Let me check mine.
So Guys, I just took my granola out of the oven and I will show you mine. Look, it should be very golden. It should have sort of crisped up, become a little bit golden. Can you guys see that? It was almost on the verge of burning. One thing we didn't do is sometimes during the baking process, I'll either give the pan a shake or just kind of use 2 spoons and just kind of mix it up a little bit, just to make sure that everything gets a little bit of an even coating when it's roasting or baking. But mine is good. Don't anyone else let theirs burn. And then I'm just going to let this cool down on the pan. If you've overbaked it a little bit, then take it off the pan because it'll keep cooking on the pan. Mine's just about right. So I'm going to let mine cool down just on this, just sitting on top of my stove. Sorry to interrupt your flow, Shosh, on the pasta, but I told everyone I would burn my granola and I did.
So in terms of the chickpeas, I'm actually using, there's canned, but I every so often find the frozen ones that are in the freezer section of usually Whole Foods that come in paper bags, and they are really, really nice ones. If you ever get a chance to look for those, you should, because they're a bit nuttier. They're baby chickpeas, and I love them. They have a great flavor. They're less mealy. They're almost more like nut-like, almost like hazelnutty, and I love those. So if you ever have a chance to find those, buy a few bags, keep them in their freezer. They're great. They're like little, they're like half the size. They're not as blown up. They're great. So I'm using those. I had a bag of those. Cucumber. I'm putting in basil, mint, and parsley. I'm just going to give it a rough chop. You don't have to pick off every leaf. You could use some of the stem. Don't make yourself crazy. Just give it a rough chop like that. Put that in. Mine's like really building up. And then I have my garlic, my lemon juice. I'm going to put the mustard in because I like mustard. I don't have red pepper flakes. I'm just going to put a lot of cracked black pepper. So if you don't have red pepper flakes, I usually love heat, but I just don't have them. Cracked black pepper, just put that in instead. Or if you have a jalapeno or a little Thai chili, if you happen to have that. And then olive oil. And then I'm going to take I'm going to put this jar on like this. I'm going to shake it. You could do it in a Vitamix or any blender if you feel it's easier for you. And then I'm just going to give it a toss. Toss it all up. And I'm going to add my dates on the top. Your toasted pine nuts, you just also, like the granola, it's one of those things where you have to be really careful when you're toasting them. They burn very quickly.
So Shosh, I have a question. If you are making this in advance and you're planning to make it and serve it later, what would you assemble? Could you assemble everything that you assembled prior to adding the dressing? I assume you always want to add the dressing at the very last minute, but could you have assembled everything that you had in there together beforehand?
Yeah, so I think the longer this sits, or a little longer this sits, the better it's going to be. I think if it marinates a bit, it's just going to be better. There's just your garnish. I wouldn't put on I would put the feta in. And mozzarella and feta are really like firm cheeses, so they'll hold up. They won't disintegrate. If you were making this a day before and you were serving the next day, I would make sure it's just room temperature when I served it. I take it out 30, 45 minutes before I was serving it. I wouldn't omit anything. I would go ahead. I think if you don't over chop any of your green stuff, then it's less likely to brown. Sometimes if you go and mince your herbs too you know, you bruise them because your knife is not sharp enough, or it could turn black and maybe not so pretty. But if you give everything a rough chop, everything should be great for a day before. And possibly even better because it's just sitting. I'm going to put, what else? I'm going to crumple to garnish my feta.
Shosh, I make this sometimes with barley. It's really nice with barley or farro or any kind of grain.
Yeah, this is just a great combination. If you weren't putting the cheese, you could put in grilled chicken. Also, any leftover cold grilled chicken that you might have had, you could throw in there, and just omit the, obviously, just take away the cheese. This is a great way you can put a boiled, like chopped boiled egg in there. You can really, it's really a great way to make bulk, right? Like a lot of people eating every day, you want bulk, you want to maybe have it the next day. You don't want to make a brand new dish. It's a great way to make, to load everything up, even use some old stuff like herbs that are not finished. Oh, we always have, Jessica, she's so cute. Aubrey always finishes first.
I love that. Aubrey, you want to hold it up again? I'm really impressed. Nice. Great job.
And I'm going to take my date and I'm just going to cut it up into little pieces. You could put oregano. I mean, just think Mediterranean, think Greek, thinking, that's, if you like it hot and you have, I said, like the jalapeno, if I had one, I'd probably use it because I love spice in my food. And this is mine.
Yum. If you want to be super brave, you could add anchovies and then skip out the salt.
Oh, that's the best. I love anchovies. Yep. This is great. Also, you could piece of salmon, shredded salmon, any leftover baked salmon that you have, you could shred that in. So that would be great too. Any questions? I think I burnt my granola. Shit. Just the edges. It's okay.
As long as it's not black, it'll be all right. I actually occasionally don't mind the burnt bits. That was great, Josh. Nice.
Yeah.
What are we seeing from the Atzels and Beinarts today? What's that, guys?
It's like a chocolate cake with graham crackers and s'mores, but we dropped it actually on the kitchen table. So it sort of messed up like really badly.
It looks like it survived that fall. It looks good.
Pat, what did I do?
All right, Atzels, time to go back on mute. All right, so Shosh, thanks for that. I think let's talk about the pastry dough. So, Shosh, you ready to move on to that?
Yeah, I'm actually just cleaned my board so my pastry doesn't smell like garlic.
I think just a few words on pastry dough. Shosh is the chef, so she's going to kind of lead this conversation, but I just wanted to say pastry dough is something that I'd never really made myself or very often until the last couple of years when I took a class and I learned how to make it, and I realized that it is so easy to make. So I'm excited for us to make this together today and just see how easy it is. But the best thing as well is that you can make batches of it and put them in the freezer, and they last weeks, if not maybe months in the freezer. So it's always fun to have a couple of extra discs of pastry dough that are just in your freezer for whenever you need to take them out and use it. And it's perfect for both savory and sweet dishes. So today we picked a sweet dish, but the base recipe is the same. It's just a question of adding a little bit of sugar at the end for a sweet version of it. So Shosh, you want to take us away on this?
Yeah, okay, so this is a galette dough. You're gonna see a few variations of this. This is a fun dough to have. It's easy because it's free form. You actually could, and I've done it because I think the savory pastry recipe actually resembles a Julia Child recipe with the sour cream, and she uses it both for savory and for sweet. So you don't actually have to, if you only want to make one dough, you could use the savory dough for both. But what I do is sometimes I sprinkle a bit of sugar on that crust on top of the, we'll show you that next week. But if you wanted only to make one dough and double it up, you could use the savory one for sweet and savory. They're free form. And the trick is, and I'm not, like, I've made this galette. The next pandemic, we will do a more advanced pastry dough. This is really like, you can make little apple galettes. It's all, you could even just use your fingers. So you want to make sure your butter is cold, because you don't want it melting too much. You want sort of being really greasy. So I'm going to do the sweet one, if that's okay with everybody. So where's my knife? Take this knife. Okay, so 6 ounces of very cold butter. I don't even know what this is for. I need one more thing. Okay, so I'm going to use, you could, if anyone of you have a Cuisinart, this is like a one dump thing. You don't have to worry about it. And sometimes when I prep my water, when they say very cold, I actually put a ice cube in it to make it very cold, because the very cold water is going to prevent the butter from melting even further while you work with it. That's why they want you to have very cold water. So I need 2 more ounces. So I'm going to use my finger. So I'm going to just chop. Here, I'm going to move my screen. I'm doing it with my hands because I don't have a Cuisinart here. And I'm just going to make little squares of butter. This is why it's really fun, this dough, because it's foolproof. It won't ever get too there won't be any too much gluten. It's going to rest all week, and basically you just roll it out, or you could pat it out. It's a very simple dough. I'd be very surprised if you make a mistake. The savory one has a bit more going on with the sour cream. If anyone's using a Cuisinart, I think, make sure you pulse. Don't mix it, just pulse it. Just keep pressing, pulse, 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 till it becomes almost like dusty.
Like breadcrumbs.
Like breadcrumbs. And then when you put it in the saran, you sort of push it all together like sand, and you're making a sand pile, and you pat it down, comes together very nicely, and then it just goes into rest. So I need 2 more ounces of butter. So I just take 4 more ounces. And then I've done this. I've actually done a similar recipe for Passover, same recipe, but I used matzah cake flour. So I've made these galettes during Passover with cake meal and a little matzah meal to just give it some like cornmeal texture. And I made these galettes during Passover in the past. So if you save this recipe and replace the flour with cake meal.
Shosh, have you ever tried almond meal, or does that not really work?
I have not tried almond meal. Before I try almond meal, I'd use, I would play with I've made a similar style galette with, first of all, you can use gluten-free flour and play with that, but I've used chickpea flour. So if you can manage the chickpea flour taste, some people are just like, it's too chickpea, but I've made a galette with chickpea flour. So it's 100% gluten-free, and I guess it fits into some other diets. Okay, so I have a quarter cup. 1. I don't know my cup. 1, 2.
Sorry, how many cups of flour again, Shosh?
So sweet one just has a cup of flour. If you're doing this next week and you think you have more than one kid who wants to get their hands dirty, I would double the recipe, split it up, and make 2 smaller. Don't pulse, Patty. Didn't I just say that? I'm just joking. You don't need to have it come together. You could just, if you want it in pieces. And then I'm just gonna get my water, my half a teaspoon of salt, your sugar.
So Shosh, wait, have you added your water already?
I haven't. I'm putting in all, like the butter.
You start with all the dry.
Yeah, and then I'm just putting in the sugar. And now I'm gonna get my very cold water. So it's 1/3 cup here. Yeah, the point of not breaking down the butter also is that technically the more pieces of full butter that are in your crust makes the crust like flakier, more buttery tasting and flakier, and it gives air in between the crust, like because there's bigger pieces, so air gets into the crust, so you end up with a flakier crust. And that's technically why 9 out of 10 pie crusts will tell you don't just take everything and make a dough out of it. You want it to be like pieces of peas, like almost. So that's basically it. So what I would do, so I'm using my hands, I'm just gonna sort of break down the butter and the flour and the sugar and the salt.
Shosh, a good technique that I learned, and I'm trying to see if I can get my camera here. I think you guys can see this, but I have my flour and bits of butter in the bowl. I haven't added my water yet, but I learned to take like a little cube of the butter and to put it just in the palm of my hand, and then to take your thumb and just to sort of squish it so it curls into a little bit of a flat piece. Shosh, I don't know if that has ever been something you've seen, but if you guys see that, you end up with lots of little flat little pieces of butter before I add the water. I don't know, can you guys see that? How it ends up being like a flat piece. The only danger with doing this is that if your hands are very warm and you're handling the butter quite a lot, then the butter does tend to melt, which is not what you want. So
Well,
you
yeah, that's.
You need to do it quickly, but I've got little pieces of butter that look like that.
The truth of the matter, yes, definitely. And the pieces, like they want the butter pieces, so it will be a flakier, more buttery dough. And what the truth is, next week when we roll it out, it's kind of going to go all together. And if you see clumps of butter in the crust, that's okay. So it's really, now that my pieces are also kind of like in, like sort of mealy like this, you go ahead and you add your water. And what I recommend doing is getting a piece of saran wrap and dumping the dough right onto the saran wrap. If your hands are getting very too wet, you could go ahead and just add a bit more flour. Get it off your hands.
It's very, I'll say this as somebody who hasn't made pastry dough a lot. It's very much a practice type adventure, and you need to eventually work out when you've got a little bit too much flour or a little bit too much water. And so that's why it's always good to sort of be very careful with your measurements, so that you can always add a tiny bit more water or add a tiny bit more flour, but you can't take them away.
So I'm just going to use, got a little wet, I'm going to put a little dry flour on my hand, just scrape my hands clean right into the bowl. I'll get a piece of saran wrap and I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm gonna take my saran, just put it down. And then I'm gonna dump my dough right here. You don't have to over mix it. You could be crumply like this. You could go into the freezer quite messy like this. It's all over the place. Just wrap it up and you could pick up the sides to bring it together. Doesn't need to be overworked. Just fold up your thing. You could double wrap it and then you could just make a disc and that's it.
And Shosh, how many, this looks like quite a small batch. This is really to feed a galette for about 4 people?
Yeah, this seems, that's why I said, like, if you're doing, you have all week to make one of them. This is not a lot of dough because next week we're going to take it, roll it out and fold it over the pieces. The galette needs enough dough to fold over the fruit, not the whole fruit pie, but a good portion of it. This is definitely for 4 people. I mean, yes, 4 people. If you're serving 8 people, go ahead and double the recipe because it's free form. You're just going to end up just making a bigger galette. So if you double the recipe and combine the 2 next week, or just use this and then double up a recipe if you're serving more than 4 people next week.
And then, is there any difference to putting this in the freezer rather than the fridge?
So I think we'll stay fresher, and I think if we're going ahead and waiting a whole week, I would just stick it in the freezer.
Okay. And again, I remember the first time I made this, and my dough is definitely not perfect. I think, Shosh, yours is looking much better than mine, but I've already wrapped mine up. But if you look carefully, you can see sort of little dots of butter that are still in my dough. And I remember the woman I took my class with had said, no, those little dots of butter are great. They're gonna make your dough really flaky and perfect. So you definitely don't want everything all completely combined. It's nice to have that streakiness that you see with the butter.
Yeah, and that's it. So these doughs are super easy, and they're really they end up as sort of like a very, very buttery pizza. Like next week, you're going to want to take out your dough maybe 25 to 30 minutes before we start the class, so you're not stuck with frozen dough. If you guys could remember that, we'll post that on the recipe just to remind you. And we are going to go ahead and fill it. You could take this dough and you can make 4 individual galettes as well. Make mini galettes. Everyone can make their own. One person likes apples, could put apple in their galette. Someone likes blueberries, they could put blueberries. Great way to, if you have any fruit right now that you feel is bruising, you could cut it down, chop off the bad stuff, put it in a little baggie, freeze it, and we could sugar it up next week and throw it in. It's a good way to use up some old fruit. The most popular combinations obviously are apple, cinnamon, plums are in season. They could be fanned out if you want to go ahead and just pick whatever fruit that's best for your family. You don't want it too watery. Sometimes a firm fruit and a juicy fruit is a good combination. And for the savory stuff, anything goes. I mean, I think we were thinking of like ricotta and Swiss chard or something really earthy like that. But go ahead and buy whatever you think you like as a family, and we'll fill those things and help you along. There's mushrooms, Swiss chard, sauteed spinach, tomatoes, sun-dried tomatoes. So we could field a lot of questions and combinations that day, and you guys could go ahead and make whatever you want. But we'll send 2 recipes. I assume that go-to recipes.
Yeah, so we'll send by Tuesday a sweet and the savory galette filling, but I think next Sunday we'll do a sweet filling. So, and we'll use the dough that we've just made and pull it out of the freezer. So Shosh, just one question on pulling the dough back out of the freezer. So if we're going to roll this out and fill it next Sunday around 4, The dough defrosts needs about, what, 20 minutes out of the freezer? What would you recommend?
Yeah, 20 to 25, 30. If you feel like it's softened up, if you go ahead and do 40 minutes, you feel like it's getting too soft, you stick it in the fridge to keep it cold. You want to keep the dough. There's a lot of butter in this dough. I don't know if you've noticed. So you don't want to deal with it too soft because it's gonna get greasy. So you actually want it to be cold. So you could defrost it, get it so it's not like rock hard. Once it reached like it's soft, keep it in the fridge so it's cold and not too soft. So because you want to fold it. If it's too warm, it won't fold. It will be greasy and break.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll remind everybody, but if you just remember to take out your pastry before the class next week, that would be great. And if anyone has any ideas or suggestions or something they've always wanted to make, please email us. We're creating we've got 3 more classes before the school year ends. So we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you want us to make. I think that's about it for today.
Any last questions before we go?
Thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Thank you.
Photos, I guess, Sarah?
Yes,
Send
definitely send photos to pa@heschel.org. The school puts them up on social media. It's a lot of fun. So send them to pa@heschel.org. And that's it. Thank you for coming.
I'm already eating my granola.
My granola's half gone, Rachel. It's all like one.
It's so yummy when it's warm. When it comes out of the oven and it's still hot, I can never stop eating it.
Yeah, I've eaten about half of the amount. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.